Welcome back, Chip and Sarah and Ken. Turn it over to you guys. Thank you so much again for being with us today.
Thank you, Melissa. And it's great to see everybody today, or at least your names. We're delighted to be back. And by the way, you may find that if you put your Zoom on speaker view, you get the best experience. So we're going to be highlighting things for you guys to see as we go along. But we're excited to continue our conversation. And last week we talked about how do we find meaning in our work? And this week, in some ways, we're talking about how do we find work that's meaningful? We're really trying to answer the question, how do I know what specific job or career God wants me to pursue for now? And we've talked about how calling is a dynamic thing. So how do we know for now what that is? And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the challenge. And Ken and Sarah, you can join me on this. I'll just throw out some ideas and see what you think. And then we want to jump into a framework we think that helps us really grasp, how we can flip this, which is often an angst-producing, stressful process, into more of a spiritual adventure. And what does it take to flip the script on that? So that's where we're going to head this afternoon, or this morning, I guess, for you guys that are in Chicago. Sorry, we were talking about time zones before we started, and there we go. Anyway. So when it comes to figuring out, what work are we supposed to do? I mean, all of us have made that decision probably multiple times. Maybe in high school, you needed to get a job, or then you had to decide what you're going to do after high school. And then if you went to college and you got out and you got a job and you decided, is this the job for me? And we make this decision over and over again, many of us in our lives. And, it's one where it's hard to make it. It's hard to sort of feel like we can ever really start with a blank sheet of paper, because we have to push past the expectations that we receive from our parents. That's a big, huge force in what we think is possible. Some of us we do a lot of comparison with our peers. And then, we have our own dreams. And sometimes those dreams we should, go to the mat for them. And sometimes we should probably let them go. And so that's tricky. And then when we start to put ourselves out there and explore, we feel very vulnerable. Some of the things that we're doing at VOCA with clients were born out of an experience I had in a career transition back in 2014. And I was leaving 20 years. I was a pastor, and I was trying to find a job in New York City, moving from kind of rural suburban Pennsylvania to New York City. And I just felt terribly vulnerable. I felt like I just really I wasn't sure whether I really had a lot to offer, if anybody would even give me the time of day, kind of the country preacher in the big city kind of thing. And it does things in your head. And so that we feel vulnerable when we start to explore and start to reach out. And another thing I see a lot is that people get paralyzed by FOMO, by the fear of missing out. Like, if I commit to this thing, then I won't be able to do these 4 other things, but they might be the right thing. And Ken and Sarah, what do you think? What are you seeing as people are wrestling with these questions about what job am I supposed to pursue or supposed to do?
Yeah, I think that what I'm seeing is that everyone is experiencing some kind of fear. When I talk to really young people, I think their fear is that maybe the world's not going to be the way they imagined it or the way they prepared for it to be. They've got these ideals and they're hoping those ideals will really work. But what they really don't realize is work might be a little different than the way they imagined it. And then I also see on the other end of the spectrum, people that are in their senior years, maybe they haven't looked for a job in a while, or maybe they're re-entering the workplace after a while. And they feel their fear is I'm going to be lost. I'm not going to understand how the software works or how business works. Something's changed in the last, however many years. And so I think all of us could sign up for this if we had to put our name on the list of some kind of fear or anxiety related to the job search process and finding the right thing for us.
And I'm seeing that role of comparison or living up to expectations, whether it's your parents' expectations, your peers' expectations, the expectations of your reputation, and that making a shift sometimes means letting people down. And that is a really hard thing for a lot of people in career transition, right? We don't want to let people down. We don't want to be a disappointment or think that we're a disappointment. And so rather than pursuing what we sense might be our calling, we end up not wanting to disappoint our parents or not wanting to disappoint our friends and living a lesser life. And I think that not wanting to disappoint connects with this idea of comparison and FOMO, right? Because if you're not comparing yourself to other people, you're not going to have FOMO. But then there's this, yeah, like you drew, Chip, there is this idea of sort of a cycle with comparison and living up to expectations or disappointing people, turning into the phantom of who you really were meant to be, and FOMO.
Yeah. We want to push past that. We want to try and push past these fields that kind of can cloud our vision, and we want to get to some clarity. And just to put it in context of the ground that we've covered so far. So in this slide that you're seeing, we're really talking about, we said calling is dynamic, it's multidimensional, it's an invitation and a summons, it's a privilege, and it's also a responsibility. And our ultimate calling is to Christ, but also, one of the areas, the arenas where this plays out is in our work. And then linking it to what we talked a little bit about last week, when we talked about different kinds of, the way we experience different forms of meaning in our work. We're really talking about, in a sense, the two shifts here. One is to go from secular to sacred, and that's connected to how we find some peace and security to make this journey. And then also, maybe more broadly and more exciting, more attractive, is the idea that we can move from work that's chore work, just it's drudgery, to work that's treehouse work, where we have the sense, at least, that there's a significant concentration in a given job or career that matches the kinds of tasks and activities where we experience flow, where we have this this healthy sense of challenge, and our abilities are rising to meet the demands of the work that we're called to do. So that's just to connect it to where we're going. But as we jump into this, we've got four pieces to this, and we've called it the building blocks of calling. And the first has to do with where your job happens. And your job happens at the intersection of the real you and the real world. And we start with the real you. And we divide that into 4 components. And if we could see the first one, it's all okay. It's all comes in at once. Got it. So now we're all ahead of the game already, because we've got everything you need to know about you on the screen. Now we designed this the way it is on purpose, because we really think that kind of the mini pyramid there, that your abilities are on the bottom and they're the foundation, and you need to start there. And it's very rare to be able to sustain a career and a calling and an area of work that you're not gifted to do, that you don't have the raw talent to do. And so when we say abilities, we mean your natural talents, the capacities that you were born/raised with, kind of the raw material you carry into your working life. The second component are skills, and skills are the things that you learn how to do. And so all of us learn how to do things. I've had to learn how to do paperwork, even though don't have really great abilities in it. I just have to do it, right? I have to file my taxes, and there's things like that I have to do. So we think that, all things considered, you get the most impact when you build your skills on your abilities. And an illustration could be music. Like, you could have a musical talent mix, and then you have to learn skills in a given instrument. If you don't have musical ability, you could try very hard. Some of you did. Maybe you suffered through some sort of lessons when you were a child, but you're just never going to be great at it. It's always going to be drudgery. It's not really going to feel like that sense of flow. And then we put passions on the top, and there's a lot of there's a lot of good, healthy conversation around passion in the faith and work world. There's a lot of unhealthy baptizing of passion in the world beyond the faith and work conversation. We just say, do what you love, follow your passion. So we really want to qualify the passion piece. Sustained interest is a way we might define passion. Some arena or focus that sustains your interest, that constantly you find energizing. I think that's the way we would define it, rather than something that excites you momentarily, or temporarily. That there's got to be the sense that it's durable, that it's more than just enthusiasm, that has to do with that you pulls out your interest and energizes you, and it's fairly consistent. And we see this all the time as professional coaches, that people with the same abilities and skills can go various directions. And so passions are helpful as a guide to maybe what you might want to focus on. So like if you have a sales profile, what do you want to sell? You're going to probably sell something you're passionate about or interest, that sustains your interest and gives you energy. You're going to be a more effective salesperson in that space than you are in something that doesn't. So that's where we'd put that. And then the last piece here are boundaries. And this is the part that we don't want to talk about, because boundaries are really about limitations. And I'm anxious to hear why you guys just laughed at that, because you've heard this like a million times, but you just laughed. So say something about that.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I think boundaries are good. And you're right. We don't like to talk about them because we like to say you can do anything, or you can be anything you want to be, or you can have any job you want to have, but that's not reality. And boundaries are good because they give us the limitations, whether it's a geographic limitation or a life stage limitation, or an ability, skill, or passion limitation. So I think there's something really wonderfully beautiful about knowing what your boundaries are and knowing what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for. And then you don't go busting boundaries and making a mess of everything like a bull in a china shop.
Yeah.
And not only that, but like this is creativity 101. Like embracing boundaries actually makes you more creative because you have to bring out resources that fit in the boundaries. It forces you to come up with new solutions. But I was laughing, Chip, because this is exactly the opposite of the advice in the world right now. I mean, everyone would say, how do you find your right job? Well, first, throw off all boundaries. You can do whatever you want. Start with your passion. What are you passionate about? If you find your passion, you'll never work a day in your life, blah, blah, blah. And then you realize, oh, well, I have to develop that into skills. So you're developing skills based on those passions, which may be difficult, may not. It all depends on what? Your natural abilities, which is sort of last in the chain if it's upside down. And now you're trying to leverage abilities that you may not even have because you're passionate about something that you're not naturally able to do better than other people. So life's just going to be hard. No wonder we need some kind of help in this culture, because our culture has it pretty much exactly backwards.
Yeah, our culture's taken the idea that many of our parents said you can be whatever you want, and now they've said you can define your identity however you want. You can they're just amplifying it in every Disney song, and so it's like that's what we're sold. And reality, the world just doesn't bend that way. It doesn't yield to that, and it just leads to a lot of disillusionment. So I like what you said, Ken, about it being it forces us to be more creative. And Sarah, I think your points about it comes in different forms. I mean, going back to that calling chart where we have all these other callings, like I had a client who actually he was a New York guy, and his best options for work were in Chicago. But his wife just, like, it would have really been unhealthy for her to move. And, if it's just all about work and it's the career narrative, you just go for it and you just say tough. But he made a hard call, and it extended his search. It made it a little bit more difficult, but got under that eventually and showed him to something that he could, continue to be challenged and productive and contribute in the metro area without moving. And that's reality, right? Like we're multidimensional, and it's all part of our calling. So the real you, I mean, you're all wonderful, but you don't know yourselves as well as you think. And we think part of this process is really starting to get the data, get the facts, put it all together so that it makes decision making so much easier. But that's just half of the equation. The other half of the equation is the real world, illustrated by the map. And the real world is what's happening in the market for your talent. What's going on out there. It's beyond you. So the real you is somewhat of an introspective process, whereas the real world is a discovery process. It's getting out. And there's kind of three questions that we always coach people to ask, broad categories, when they go out and start to figure out, well, what's possible. And this doesn't matter if you're in college trying to think, what's my job going to be, or if you hate your job and you're trying to think about something different. We still think you should go out into the world and have conversations and discern the answers to these questions. The first one is personal fit. Is this job that somebody else has that I might be interested in is a good fit for me? Or is this company a good fit for me? Or is this industry a good fit for me? I've had some clients in private equity and they've just realized that for your first 10 to 15 years in private equity, you're going to work 100 hours a week. At least you are in New York City. And if you want to stay in that business, that's just the way it is. And in one case, they decided they were going to do it. It was worth it. It was a personal fit. They worked it out, and the other, they didn't. And that's not even about the skills required. It's just about the lifestyle that's demanded of that job. And before we do the shame on finance, I mean, people in medicine have been, doing those types of things, even veterinarians for centuries. So that's just the way some vocations are, and that could be okay. But the first thing you're looking for is personal fit. The second is you want to try and assess opportunity. Is this an area where there's more hiring, where there's more jobs are being added, that kind of thing. I contemplated a transition in 2009, 2010 into international Christian nonprofit. And that was right after everybody got laid off in 2008 and 2009. There was not opportunity. There was a glut of talent in that space. So for me to move from one industry into that industry during a time when there wasn't a lot of opportunity, it wasn't necessarily impossible, but it was going to take a lot of time and it's going to be very hard. And so assess the opportunity. And the last thing you do is if you get a green light on personal fit, yeah, this would be a good industry, job, company for me to work. And there are separate categories, but anyway, those are the things you suss out. There is opportunity. I'm not jumping onto a shrinking iceberg. You get a green light on that. Then you ask the question, well, what steps do I need to take to get from where I am now to there? And sometimes you've got all the credentials, you just need to talk to the right people. Sometimes you need to go get a certification or something, and sometimes you need to go back to school. But the bottom line is you find out what's it going to take for me to get there. The real world. Thoughts on the real world, guys?
Yeah, I think the order is so critical here. I was just reflecting on coaching a client last week. He had 5 career options that he was passionate about, and one of them didn't fit his abilities, so we scratched that off. We had 4 more that we were doing with the real world. And I was able to show him data that one of the things he was really passionate and interested and able to do had a really bright outlook. There was lots of jobs coming out of the market. And another one, the outlook was horrible. So even if he had to, as it indicated, get more education for the one that was a good outlook, it turns out that because there's so much opportunity there and there's market demand, which means the salaries are going to go up because there's not enough people to meet the demand. By the time he gets his degree and looks for a job, that job is going to more than pay for taking those extra steps, as we see here, to get that job. Whereas the other one would be a constant frustration and he'd be looking for work that just wasn't there.
Right.
I had a similar conversation, Ken, with a client. At first, I'm like, "Have you had a meeting with my client?" Because he's in that same job transition section where he needs to leave. He was laid off, so he needs to find something else. But what he wants to go into, what is a good fit, where there's opportunity, is going to require him to go back to school and get another degree. And so, but it's worth it because the opportunity is growing and it fits with his abilities, fits with his skills, and it fits with his passions. So the investment of time and money, it's a real stewardship for him getting where he wants to. And in the meantime, we've been talking about what are part-time jobs or jobs he can work while he's finishing this educational process to get to what he really wants. And even thinking about how do we find the right fit for him in that temporary space so that he's adding, so what he's doing in the meantime becomes an asset, a value add to what he wants to go after in a couple of years.
That's huge, because what you just said, Sarah, it's like one point you're making is it's steps often, it's not like it's not like those movers in the airport. You just stand on it and it suddenly gets you to kind of your terminal. It's not that way at all. It's more like it's more like you're gonna have to go here and then here and then here, and you're gonna get closer each time. The other thing is, if you really know what your abilities and skills are, you can bring them to bear in almost any situation. And even if it's the temporary one, so that it helps you give you kind of a personal strategy for thriving while you're on your way to that destination. That's a great point.
Well, and that vision also gives you that encouragement to keep pushing on, right? It's like casting the vision of where you want to go. So when things get hard, or when your family or your friends are saying, why are you doing this? You've got something to hold up to them, and remind yourself that it's worth it. You don't have to live up to other people's expectations.
It's great. A lot of freedom in that.
Amen.
So this is where the conversation usually ends, right? Real world, real you, find the match. You know, it's just any career coach that's worth their salt probably has a model that's like this in some form or the other. And they're going to definitely do some assessment with you, and they're going to also talk about some sort of exploration process to verify opportunity. But we don't want to end there, because we think there's more. I think there's more to the picture. So let's talk about how the gospel speaks into this whole journey of figuring out where we're headed with our work. The foundation for the trip is really our gospel identity. And from 1 John 3, it says, we are the children of God. That's who we are. And it says, you know, the world doesn't totally understand that. And we don't totally understand what that's all going to mean, actually. You know, it's kind of like, you know, the painting isn't done here, guys. It's partially filled in. But what's really important is that our identity is defined by whose we are, not what we accomplish or what we do. The way Tim Keller says it is that we have a received identity rather than an achieved identity. And, you know, when you're getting sucked into the comparison game, and I'm not as accomplished as my older sister, or I'm not doing what my dad wanted me to do, or my friends from college, you know, at least from their social media feed, it looks like they're making 3 times as much as me. You know, like all that stuff hits you, and you start to think, I'm behind, or I'm a lesser person. And the gospel identity comes in and just pushes all of that out the door. And so it's the foundation for this. You guys want to say anything about that before we move on to the next piece?
Well, I find it interesting that we're using this sort of car analogy. It implies that we can go faster and easier with that identity. And that's kind of my experience. It takes some of the friction out of the journey. If I'm not adding to the job search all of this extra emotional weight and anxiety of like, who am I? Who do other people want me to be? Am I living up to their expectation? It just gets into this whole, you know, trying to achieve, trying to perform. I'm naturally kind of wanting to show I'm good by my performance and my, you know, my contribution. And this just helps me relax. Like, whoa, you know, you can't be more or less of a child of God than you already are. Chill. It doesn't mean you're going to do nothing. Doesn't mean there's nothing to do or no work involved, but just makes the journey all that much smoother and more efficient, I think.
It also strikes me that we're looking at a car chassis as opposed to a bicycle, right? Where I'm powering it and I'm working it, and the hills might slow me down if I'm not changing the gears. But, you know, with the car, I just need to strap in, put my seatbelt on, and let the car and the motor do the work. And I think that's the way it is with this concept of a received identity versus versus the achieved identity, right? I receive from the Lord, and that's who I am. I don't have to prove anything.
It's freeing, it's liberating, and it enables us to have something that's actually a key success factor in this whole process, which is a learning mindset. So we can be open to learning all these things that we've suggested. We'll come back to that in a second, but it really has a very, very practical application in terms of giving us the mental framework to just say, okay, I'm going to go find it. And some of the lessons are going to be hard and some are going to be easy, and it's going to be fun, and boom. But we don't want to just ride around in a chassis, right? Like, you know, we need cover, and that comes from gospel destiny. And I'm sure many of you have heard Ephesians 3:10, you know, we're God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do the works he planned in advance for us to do. Well, we think that this applies to our work, that the work he's planned for us to do includes our jobs. It includes the the things we do there every day, that it's on the list. And it's basically, this verse is saying, God's got a plan. God has a plan for your work. He's already planned it out in advance. And, I think we said this in week 1, but he's the caller, we're the called. And, it's our job to listen, but it's his job to direct. And that takes some of that performance pressure off of us as well. It takes off this demand that I have to figure this out and I have to figure it out now. And because it's promised, he's got good work that he's planned for me to do. And it's his job to plan it, it's his job to direct, and it's my job to do it when that becomes apparent. Thoughts on that?
I love this, being encapsulated, surrounded, protected by this gospel identity and this gospel destiny, that my received identity as a child of God protects me on from one side of whether they're ruts in the road or potholes, but I'm also protected by this covering that God's good hand is upon my life, and that there's good in store, that there is purpose for my life and a way for me to represent and re-image God on this earth, that his fingerprints are all over this. And that gives the protection that if we go off the rails, if we go off-roading, if life feels like it's veering in a direction I'm not sure I'm comfortable with, there's protection all around me.
Yeah, there is protection. What there is not is you don't get to find out exactly where everything's going. It's a little bit of an adventure. I'm reminded of Abraham's calling, where God said, follow me. I'm going to take you to a place that I'll let you know about. It's kind of like, well, where's that? So this is like driving by faith, to extend the analogy. You understand yourself in the world, but you don't always understand where God's going to take you. And that can be quite an adventure.
No, that's really good. So let's just wrap this up into a couple of action items, and then we'll take questions. I see we've already got one there, so we'll look forward to talking to speaking to those as best we can. But I think part of this whole process is a commitment that we want to go find the truth out. We're going to go find the truth out about ourselves and about the world. Like, we're not going to assume that we already know it. We're not going to assume that we've got it figured out. We're going to make a commitment to go find the truth. And sometimes, we just skim on this. And one of my mentors used to say to me, decisions become easy when all the facts become known. And I think that just was one of those light bulb moments. It resonated, and it's like, whenever I'm in a situation, I do everything I can to find out all the facts that I can reasonably gather. And so we're saying, find the facts out about you, find the facts out about the world. The second piece is probably a little bit harder, and that's to embrace what we find, embrace the truth about yourself and the world. And when I was in that transition from the Philly suburbs to New York City, one of the jobs I was really interested in was management consulting. And I was 45. I had been a pastor for 20 years. I had a business degree, but then I had 2 seminary degrees. And in case some of you wondered, McKinsey and Deloitte don't hire people like that to be consultants. They don't. They hire people with MBAs from Ivy League schools. That's who are in their 30s. Or about 30. They already have a pipeline. They already have a mindset. And I learned that, and I had to embrace that. It was a limitation, right? It was a boundary issue. And even though I'm like, from a talent perspective, I might have the capacity to do that work, I didn't have the resume to get it. And that's the way it was. And so I pivoted, I went and pursued something else. But the point is, we have to be willing to embrace it. We just had a guest on our webinar last week who, she went into investment banking and she wasn't very good at it. And she might have gotten some hints, I don't know, but she eventually she came to this conclusion: investment banking is not for me, even though I went to college for it, even though my dad wanted me to do it. It's just not for me. And so we don't have to just find the facts, but we have to embrace them, which is the harder part. I think, and so sometimes we just get stuck. We're afraid of what we might find out. We're actually afraid of what we already know, and we don't want to deal with it. And then the third thing I will say, and Ken and Sarah, feel free to add any other thoughts about what we do with all this, is I just think we need to find ways to reinforce the truths of the gospel in our lives, which is, you guys are doing that with Burnham Fellowship and things like that, that just really weave it into our daily rhythms and the way we perceive ourselves in the world and our work, because you're not going to get any reinforcement for your gospel identity or destiny from your boss. In most cases, that's just not going to come from there, and you have to backfill that and find, the spiritual rhythms, the kind of things that make you gospel resilient, that are going to enable you to carry through that, because it's going to be hard, and that's where Christian community and spiritual disciplines and that kind of thing, finding the mix that's right for you, is part of that. It's a critical action item to reinforce that part of the model. So I see those three things. We've got to find the truth, we've got to embrace the truth, and then we've got to lean into the truth of the gospel on a day-to-day basis. And then I think this can happen. Guys, have any other thoughts about action items? And then we can get to some questions.
Yeah, well, one of the action items is a question, so I wanted to just go ahead and address it. Beth Ann Williams, any insight for balancing opportunity versus fit? I have a PhD and want to be faculty, so a huge investment of time, but looking at a shrinking opportunity field. Well, just this touches on almost all the things we just said. One of them is, looking at the real world and seeing what is really out there. We've had people that have been in this very position as career navigators, and there's not that many potential outcomes here. One is you embrace the PhD. You don't say no for people about the shrinking opportunity and assume that there's nothing for you. You go out and get it, and you compete for those jobs that are available, even if it means brushing up on some extra skills or adding something, some kind of experience that makes you even more competitive, more appealing. Others have taken that same situation and said, okay, well, where else can a PhD be useful? Maybe not faculty, but as a consultant, as a key advisor, as someone who's an expert that can offer things in the marketplace outside of academia. We've seen that as well. And another thing is using the PhD indirectly by leveraging other skills and abilities that have been picked up along the way, whether it's communication or you work in the laboratory or what have you. So really, there's not enough information to solve this here, but looking at this model and allowing it to shape the process, you can see where this could go from being really fuzzy and unknown and anxiety producing, and oh my gosh, I'm in a shrinking field, woe is me, I'm never going to get a job, to real clear points of decision making that can make this a path that we could map out.
Yeah, I would just add to that, to Beth Ann, it's a great question. I think I would add that I would assign you the task of identifying people who are getting faculty jobs, and I would analyze their experience. If I could talk to them, I'd find out how they do it. I would just find out what are the characteristics of the people that are winning at this game you want to play, and then you can make an assessment about whether or not you want to play that game, whether or not you're supposed to play that game, or whether or not you want to play that game. And there could be two different answers, but like I have one of my kids is in she's in a PhD program as well, and she's finding out that it's a science program, but getting grants is actually a big part of the game, and the professors that get grants are the ones that actually get to stay and get to teach. And and so that's about relationships, it's about communication, and maybe that sounds exciting, or maybe that sounds terrible, but and I don't know if that's true in the field where your PhD is, but I just think it's figure out, reverse engineer the people who are winning, and figure out whether or not that's how you might be able to do the same thing.
And all of this conversation is part of the work, right? So Chip outlined 3 parts of the work: finding the truth, embracing the truth, and reinforcing the truth. And all of this circles back into that category of finding out the truth. We need to do what we can to figure out what is reality, because reality, that's a set of boundaries right there. So let's understand the truth, because that's going to give us boundaries for this job search. And just as Chip's professor talked about how decisions are easy when all the facts are known, I've got a friend who used to say adequate preparation results in leading without hesitation. Adequate preparation results in leading without hesitation. And when we've done our homework to understand what the boundaries are, to understand what the truth is and define the truth, when we have all the facts, then we know what decisions we can make. But too often we make decisions based on assumptions, or on what we think other people want, instead of on the facts, on the truth, on the boundaries that are really guiding the decision we need to make.
Good.
Yeah, I love that, Sarah. And just to pick up briefly, I think one of the things that strikes me is we talk about how the gospel enables us to face the truth. You know, so we are people who don't have to be afraid of what we're going to find out, of what's true, of what limitations we have, of what is out there. You know, so often I think we want to sort of live in like, if I don't know, that it can't hurt me or something like that. But I think that that I love that, you know, as people who know the truth, you know, capital T, we know what is true about our world, we know what is true about ourselves, and so we don't have to fear, you know, looking at what's true, because we know who has us, just as we talk about that gospel identity. But it applies in this situation too.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. You know, there were 4 in the furnace. And so, you know, when we walk hand in hand with Jesus, we've got that other person in the furnace with us, that fiery furnace, and we don't have to fear reality. We can walk through reality with Jesus, and he'll help us understand and know the truth. And as we know, the truth sets us free, and there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. So walking in partnership with Jesus, taking on his yoke, allows us a lot of freedom. Amen.
I saw some other good questions. I had a couple come to me, and then I think there's still a couple in the chat here. And actually, there's 2 that are similar. So I think this is a great one to hit on. Nicole highlighted it, as did someone else. So sort of this, like, how do we deal with experience of guilt? Someone said that about kind of pursuing something that they feel passionate about. Nicole talked about it as maybe selfish, you know, something that's, you know, however we sort of deem this idea of what's important and meaningful versus what we're good at. So how do we sort of like hold on to maybe some of those tensions where it feels like, man, I'm good at this, but I've got these responsibilities here, so I shouldn't do it, or I'm passionate about this, but it feels like it's, you know, not as meaningful or important. So how do you navigate some of those tensions?
I would say it's about priorities and order. So if you're starting with your passions, you're doing it wrong, right? Start with your natural abilities and build your skills on that, and make sure your passions are aligned with that. And then you've really got something going. You don't need to feel embarrassed or, you know, guilty about being passionate about your work. That's not the trouble. The trouble is what happens when the passion drives everything, when it's the high priority. And then you realize your passions change, or it doesn't match reality, or your skills and abilities aren't in line. And pretty soon you're really frustrated at work, and you're going through lots of jobs, and it's costing companies money to hire you, and you're just getting unfulfilled. So I think that's why the model's built in a certain order, and that's why we do things a step at a time, and then everything in its proper place.
Yeah, that's good. I would say, first of all, let's feeding this idea that it might be selfish. Explore that, because that could be false guilt that's coming from certain expectations, or it could be conviction, right? So I don't want to, you know, you're going to be careful about talking you out of something that God might be convicting you of. So I don't know. But the other thing is, I think when it comes to meaning or important, boy, that's so subjective, right? Like, and I think there is like this, I think we can make an idol out of doing meaningful, important work. Like, you know, I'm doing nonprofit work. and that's much more meaningful than your job or whatever. And so then it just becomes another way to get ahead, just using a different scorecard. And so there could be a lot of reasons why we think something's more important or meaningful. And so it's worth sorting through that a little bit. I read a quote by Eugene Peterson, I think it was in Long Obedience, in the same direction, where he basically said, we don't know the ultimate meaning and outcome of our work. Like we can't really domesticate that. Like it's a wild thing, and God's going to take care of it. And so, we have to trust that based on what we know about ourselves and the opportunities in the world and our experience, that this is our best way to follow his leading now. And we don't know where it's all going to end. And I think that's one of the things that, many of us are professional Christians here on the screen. Like in Christian institutions, we've sold you the idea that you can know what the outcome is going to be and what the meaning is going to be. And it's not always the case. It kind of goes back to our diagram the first week about there's brokenness in every field, and there's no like insurance policy that this work is meaningful and this work isn't.
Chip, you picked up on the word important in the way Melissa phrased the question. What perked my ears and got my attention was the word should. And that's one of those words that makes me sit up straight and I think, there's some expectation or some assumptions there. And so anytime a client uses the word should, I ask them to stop and think about that. And it goes back to a quote I heard from Henry Nouwen. I think it was Henry Nouwen. And he said, I will not should on myself today. Right? That should is a word loaded with pressure and expectation. But what happens when we take that off and we change that to what do we need to do or what do we want to do? And who's the one putting that on us? There's a whole lot of freedom when we lift the shoulds out of our lives.
Good.
I'm getting some good questions coming in here too. I think even just based on one of the conversations we just had, an idea that was given for Beth Ann, I think, about observing maybe those who are winning in a particular industry or interest. So the question that they're asking is, what may you recommend if we sort of discern that those who are maybe getting ahead or winning, however you want to understand that, aren't really aligned with the gospel and with the kind of the flourishing of others. So what do we do when sort of we meet a real world that may need less of people winning and more of those who are maybe, embracing renewal or even suffering on behalf. So, and thoughts on sort of how you think about that in terms of where winning maybe isn't gospel driven.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's almost, I've seen it as like you have two choices. So one is you stay in that lane, you stay in that industry, in that job, and you have to trust God to sustain you. And, there's all these stories in the Bible about God miraculously sustaining people in different ways, politically and economically and all that kind of thing. And that could be what he's calling you to do, to be vulnerable, to live in a place of vulnerability for a while. Like you're not going to compromise. I mean, Sarah uses Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story. They wouldn't compromise. They made them vulnerable. They almost lost their lives, and God rescued them. I mean, that's a great story. I mean, you may not want to live that story and get, being tossed into a fiery furnace. That's fine. But, there's that tack, or the other tack is that you go find some other place that's more aligned, which is probably more, that's the script that we all assume we're supposed to take, I think. But it could be either one. I mean, it just could be either one. I think of, this is really macro, but Moses saying to Pharaoh, you need to let us go. We need to go worship God in freedom, and you need to let us go. And that's another, I mean, it's a biblical strategy. It's a strategy. So you could stay or leave, and it's subjective. And, the trick with leaving is that we always think that's going to make it better, and sometimes it doesn't. I think that's we find there's other issues, So that's my thoughts, guys.
Absolutely.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm laughing because there's a sense in which every job has fallen people that are running it and supporting it that don't always make the right decision. Where do you stop with this whole not supporting good things. And yet at the same time, that's why the boundaries is on the model. We need to have boundaries about what we will do and what we will not do. So there's certain industries you might not really be called to go to, or activities that you maybe need to refrain from doing. And that just needs to be a personal boundary for you.
Let me see if I can get one more question in here before our time is up. I think this is somebody who's, just very practically navigating some stuff in their own career. But thinking through ideas of like not wanting to disappoint our bosses or let people down, sort of how do we balance responsibility and seeing something through, or in staying in our job for a certain amount of time, with maybe wanting to pursue something else, or different opportunities coming along. So how do we maybe navigate that kind of situation?
It's interesting. So I don't know who asked that question. I don't want to be crass or insensitive, but a lot of the times when I've had clients have that conversation, like, I'm here, and they usually have a high sense of loyalty, but they're very frustrated. They don't have a verified other option, and they don't want to spend the time to verify another option. So what I'm saying is, until you have a verified other opportunity or something else you can do, you actually don't really have a choice. Assuming you need to work for a living and pay your bills, and you're not independently wealthy and that kind of thing, you have to stay where you are. And I think that, so at the surface, so I hear that a lot. I hear like that. I really think I might be supposed to do something else. But then when you really poke in and say, well, what are you doing to discover what that something else might be? There really isn't a willingness to do that, which gets that back to that idea. We need to go seek the truth. We need to embrace the truth. And then the other thing I would just say is that if you do feel like you're in a situation where potentially you're expressing an unhealthy level of loyalty, then that's something that's worth also exploring. And a lot of times it's, like my wife worked for a guy for 3 years. It always said he was going to give her a raise and never did. So, why didn't she? Actually did try and confront him on that, but she eventually just decided to leave. But, so like, what are we tolerating? I guess that maybe if we pushed it, things would either get better or we'd be forced to make a decision, So I think that's another issue to just examine. Is there some kind of dysfunction here? Is there some kind of attachment? Is there some kind of unhealthy loyalty that I need to work through? So those are a couple of thoughts on that.
Good.
Right. Well, gosh, somehow this time has gone by so fast. It always seems to. This is such good content. I continue to just love hearing you guys kind of tease this out. Appreciate the models and whatnot that you've offered us as well. Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for just kind of putting some opportunities here in the chat. If you take a look at that as a webinar series, just some of the different things that they have going on at VOCA with the career search training program. I think I also want to highlight just you hear them talking about just coaching and clients that they work with. One thing to take advantage of, and this I'll put this in our in a follow-up email as well, but they do offer a 30-minute free just consultation if it's something that you want to kind of find out, like, would I benefit from more coaching or from one of the programs that VOCA offers? You can register for one of those on their website as well. I don't know, Chip or Ken or Sarah, if you want to say anything about that, but I think that's one of the things I want to make sure people are aware of and take advantage of.
I dropped a link in the chat.
Yeah, Sarah dropped a link. I mean, it's all about a conversation, right? So it's a basically free 30 minutes of coaching, because we want to listen to you, we understand what's significant and big and what you're wrestling with. And then we usually it's not like a 30-minute infomercial. It's a 28-minute coaching session with some suggestions for follow-up and things that would be helpful. So yeah, feel free to schedule with any of us.
Yeah, just fantastic resources here. And I know there are a lot of, kind of career coaching options out there, but I think what I so appreciate is just the foundation that you guys are coming from, not only your value in just, scripture and your identity in Christ, but that you're thinking about work from this sort of theological basis and offering that to your coaching and clients. So thank you guys so much again for being with us, Chip, Ken, and Sarah. And then for those of you who tuned in today, so thankful if you're watching this on replay. Yeah, just grateful to have you part of the things that we're offering, and hope that it's been helpful for you, and that you'll join us one more time next week as we finish out this series on calling. I think we're going to get into some really specifics on the job search. So if that's something that you're doing right now or might be doing in the future, I think it'd be great to join us back here again next Tuesday at noon. So thank you guys so much. Have a great afternoon. For those of you who are in the 70s, get outside, enjoy the weather. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you back here next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Have a great week.